Welcome to iPad Pros, the show all about using your iPad to be productive and get work done. I'm Tim Chen, host of the show.
You basically just open ZBrush up, open up a sphere on the screen, and then with your pencil just get used to firstly the move tool, and then that basically just allows you to pull the clay around. Once you've got used to that, use, and this is in the free one that I'm talking about, so move would be your first one. Clay build-up adds and removes clay, so then you're adding and you're taking and adding clay and moving your model around. So if you can use move, clay build-up, and then there's a thing where you want to smooth your clay. So this is like running your thumb across the clay, and that's just holding the shift key. Now the shift key, obviously that sounds like it's on a keyboard, but there's a little sphere on the screen that has all of your keys on it. If you just pop your thumb on that on the screen, that reverses the brush. So for example, if you're adding clay and then you hold down the shift, then it will smooth that clay down. And there's another button on there that would reverse it. So that's like pushing your thumb into the clay.
Welcome to another episode of iPad Pros. I'm pleased to be joined this week by Glen Southern to talk all about ZBrush and digital sculpting. This is a professional application used in the video game realm as well as movies to create these digital assets you'll see in things like Lord of the Rings. This is a tool widely used across the industry, and it has now come to iPad. Glen has decades of experience in the industry, working with people like J.J. Abrams, Guillermo del Toro, and has done extensive work in the film and TV industry. So this is a wider range of discussion about his background, digital sculpting tools in general, and we do a deep dive into ZBrush on the iPad. As a reminder, you can support this podcast over patreon.com/iPadPros or by subscribing in Apple Podcasts. My great thanks to everyone that supports the show. By subscribing at either of those places, you'll get early access to both iPad Pros and Vision Pros. With that, here's my discussion with Glen, all about ZBrush and digital sculpting. Enjoy. Welcome to the podcast, Glen.
Hey, good morning.
Morning. Yeah. Thank you so much for making the time this weekend, and I'm really excited to dive into this topic because I know this app has been out a while now, and I have yet to find someone to talk to because it is kind of like a professional end thing where you got to find the people that actually can use this program because it's a kind of a ZBrush, and it's kind of a higher end application.
Yeah, it's a funny one because it's quite late to the party, which we'll discuss probably during the podcast, but it's it's been around for a long time, which I'll talk about, but they came to it only this year, so yeah, we can cover off why it's so important that they have now arrived on the iPad.
For sure. Yeah. Can you share a bit on your background?
Yeah, I can share a lot because I'm quite old. So I'm probably on my I'm going to say my final career now because I'm teaching heavily at the moment. So I was going to retire a few years ago, and I just wasn't ready at all. So I'll go all the way back to how it started and why I'm probably talking to you today. So I started in the 1980s at 15, left school with no qualifications and just got straight into it was actually a stop motion studio just as a junior, and that quickly evolved into me realizing that's pretty much, I wanted to be creating like that. And bear in mind, this is pre most of computing. Obviously, desktop computers weren't anywhere near like they are now. But I'd been drawing all my life. My mum and dad are both artists in some capacity, even though not professionally. So I grew up in a family drawing all the time. So most of my stuff came from a 2D background, so a pencil pen, a bit of graphics and stuff like that with, cutting and pasting. And then I moved into... I quite liked the idea of print back then, so I got heavily into print in my teens, and I was earning really good money for someone of that age, and I ended up buying a house at kind of 18, which now seems unbelievable to people in this country. So obviously I'm in the UK. So with that came pressures of like a mortgage and needing more money, and so by 20, I think, and I was also married at that point, I stepped out of the creative industry. I'd got a commercial graphics qualification, so I was pretty sure that's what I was going to do forever. But it just wasn't making enough money, even illustrating for magazines. I was doing fantasy artwork, drawing for loads of what we used to call play-by-mail magazines. And I just needed more money really, so I just needed to get out of that. So I went and tried a few rubbishy jobs, but carried on the artwork all the way into the 90s. And then I ended up in a job where I could get some serious qualifications. So I ended up tried a bit of retail and all kinds of stuff, but carried on my artwork, which was the good thing really. And then I was earning good money doing that as well. So I ended up in a big retailer in the UK that could put me through a degree. I got me got some qualifications in logistics and management training. And I realised then that I was missing the art world because I was only doing it as a hobbyist. And computers had started being a thing. So in 91, 92, I got hold of an old DX266. I can still remember it now. And I started playing with 3D Studio Max, which is obviously a 3D modelling program. And that was it then. I was hooked. I was literally hooked. And it took a while to realise that... It took me years and years to realise that I could make money doing it. But by that time, we'd had Jurassic Park, we'd had Toy Story, we'd had... 3D was a thing. 3D animated characters was a thing. People were throwing papers into SIGGRAPH every year, and it was like, right, I'm definitely getting involved in this somewhere down the line. So my friends back then were all a mixture of UK and LA. So some comic scene, some movie people who were already working on movies in some capacities. But I still wasn't in the industry fully. I was still outside of that. And then, weirdly, about 97, I think it was, 98 was the first time I saw it, which was when I saw ZBrush. So people that say to me that digital sculpting is new don't realise the legacy that this program has. I think it hit SIGGRAPH in 98 or 99 when it was presented at SIGGRAPH, and then people were very dismissive because everyone was using a lot of people were still using Lightwave back then, if anyone remembers that, which 50% of that became Modo, which some people will remember or know of. And then there was also Maya, or Maya, depending on how you say it. Mm-hmm. So lots of programs around, but none of it could do organic modelling. And that was the big problem, was the organic stuff. So Toy Story 1 was done with what we call NURBS, so B-splines, very, very old-fashioned technology. And it took to, Jerry's game with Pixar to get subdivision modelling to be like at the forefront, and then everybody was into organic modelling, and ZBrush was in that mix as it was evolving. So I was just really lucky to get friendly with some people who were starting that company, the guy that wrote ZBrush and his marketing director. So went over to LA, did some work with them, did their first posters with them the first few years of about 2001. And then a lot of my mates were working on like Lord of the Rings and some of the the bigger bigger movies, IPs that then needed digital sculpting. So nothing in Lord of the Rings 1, which is obviously late 90s, but like by the time we got to like the Return of the King, there was the cave trolls and some of them needed sculpting, and there was Gollum obviously was now going from model into sculpting, and a friend of mine, Bay, did a lot of the technical work on that. So I'm moving around these kind of guys and girls and thinking, right, I want in on this, but couldn't quite step out of my life really. I had quite a nice little setup going, had a nice house, car, we were both happy. Kids obviously delays things, but I was like, I've got to get into this. I've got to step to this full time really. Started doing lots of Amazon had just started big time. You could sell on Amazon back then at the very, very early days of Amazon. And I was selling ZBrush DVDs out of my garage as well as having a career. So I knew I could make other kinds of money on this sort of stuff. And that was it really. I was kind of hooked at that point. It was just a matter of time before I decided to go fully and set my own company up. And I just waited for the right opportunity to come along. And then when that opportunity did come along, it was big, and it was with it was a director that emailed me. So it was JJ Abrams, dropped me a little email saying, look, I love what you're doing with ZBrush, and why don't you come over to LA and we'll talk about some work. And that was it really. It kind of solidified me into, right, I've got to set this off as a, I've got to change this some way. And then I set up a company, and boom, that was it. I just carried on doing that really. So that got me solidified into movies, TV, modeling, very, very serious about the technology that drives it and learning it, and even teaching it on DVDs back then, and a little bit online.
Very cool.
Yeah, so and then it rolls into the next kind of the next 20 years really, which is everything that we'll talk about really.
What were some of the film and TV projects you ended up doing over your career?
So in the early days, I was doing anything that involved creatures, really. So I did some garbage ones in the big scheme of things, but it got me the learning that I needed. So I worked on things like Dungeons and Dragons, the second one. So I did the Ice Dragon, and I worked on a little bit of a couple of the D&D creatures, and I got a lot of experience on set then. And I was advising about, because I was playing D&D in the early days, back in the 70s. I started D&D when it started. So I knew a lot about the lore. I knew a lot about, they were having a character, for example, as like a kobold as a main character, and I was like, whoa, hang on, this needs to be something that can cast magic, and let's use a lizard man. So I was able to advise on things like that. And then later on, I moved on. I worked on some game work. Actually, stepped into a couple of Sony titles back in when Next Gen just started, and then really it kind of moved on when I started doing TV work. So I did a lot of classical horror stuff, like Penny Dreadful, worked on that. Ripper Street, which is a TV show about Jack the Ripper, obviously. Loads and loads of little middle of the range TV shows. Anything where I could step in and build a character. And I'm just trying to think of all the bigger titles. So I then moved later on did a lot of work on the opening sequences for Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom, and then it moved in up you just get to go up a grade each film, really. And then the kind of towards when I was thinking, right, I've kind of done enough now. The thing that got me like some awards and some time where I thought, right, this is it now, I need to relax now. I was a technical sculptor on Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio. So I did the build of Pinocchio himself, the stop motion puppet. That was a superb job, because that pushed me to the limit with ZBrush, Maya, 3D printing in color, the full gamut of skills.
Right. Yeah, because you're modeling and it's stop motion, so they're filming. What?
Oh yeah, it's insane. Yeah, and you're even starting with plasticine. There's even sculptors before you with, a lot of the design had to be done in the traditional way with plasticine, which is insane if you think about it in this modern day. And that team was Shadow Machine ran it in Portland, Oregon, and a lot of them. The team there came out of Leica and obviously other similar kind of stop motion companies, but a lot of those people came out of McKinnon and Saunders, who are based here in the UK in Altrincham, and they're like the primo puppet makers in the world, really. They're like family to me, really. So anyone who's listening who knows them, they just worked on Beetlejuice, obviously, with the sandworm, and so yeah, working with them guys was really that's pretty much. I was happy then. I kind of because I like to work from the UK. I like to work from my own studio. I go on set and I go and work on films, but I like to be home a lot as I've got older. So I only really do concept work. Concept modeling and sculpting is what I enjoy the most, and teaching. So I was working on Netflix shows all the time, like Shadow and Bone, if you know that one. I did the first build of the Vault creature out of Shadow and Bone. So anything with wings, anything dragony, anything creaturey, and I'm heavily into plants. So if there's ever a job where I can get to do anything organic that's to do with plants, that's like one of my favourites. So
very cool.
So yeah, they're the kind of jobs that I mostly spent my career doing.
In the Sony games, that'd be PlayStation 3 era?
No, the PlayStation 4, I think, was the...
Oh, 4, okay.
Yeah, so it was we were testing on equipment that wasn't yet built. So we were testing in Cambridge on equipment that was just all strung together, so they hadn't even built the final unit yet. So I'm just trying to think of the titles.
Were you working with London studios out there? Or
well, it was the studios in Cambridge, really, more than the ones. Ninja Theory was the one where I trained I trained the ZBrush team in Ninja Theory. That was my main role, really. It was much more a teaching capacity.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so I'm trying to think of the title. I can't even remember that. This is how bad I am now. I can't.
Yeah.
It's funny actually because I've worked on a couple of movies in the last couple of years where I didn't even ask what the movie was. I just did my job and left.
Right. Yeah. You're just creating the creature. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I literally. There's a movie coming out and I don't know what it is. I haven't even asked. It was a particular creature. But I honestly just enjoy what I do. I'm one of those. You hear those annoying people that. I just get up in the morning smiling. So as long as I'm with the family, I'm making cool stuff. I'm teaching. 50% of what I do is teaching. And my career now is I'm a qualified teacher. I'm in a university full time now, which is only a couple of days a week actually. But that's what I've always wanted to do is pass this knowledge on. And there's a big chunk of my career in the last 10 years that I haven't mentioned yet. So I got a master's in immersive creation tools. So I'm very passionate about modern new ways of doing stuff, pre-AI, if I'm honest. I haven't really stepped too much into AI yet because of the complexities of the nature of it yet.
Sure.
But with VR, I was heavily into worked in a lot of. I basically spent like the last 10 years looking into things like Gravity Sketch. I was very lucky to work with them, got a grant with them, so it paid our wages for a good year and a half. And I worked with Oculus, or worked over in San Francisco with Facebook doing some promotional stuff, and down in Lisbon. And so working on Adobe Medium and Gravity Sketch, they're my two main tools of choice. So I learned a lot. Managed to get my master's degree in that world, so I could then move into teaching professionally, and then kind of got those qualifications I didn't get when I was in my teens.
Yeah, I was gonna say PlayStation has the VR and VR2, and it might have been too early from when you were working with them, but that seems like a fun space because you can the player can actually see in 3D your actual creations, and I know video games itself can be pretty rewarding with players unlocking the actual 3D models, and they can actually look at what you created in different galleries and stuff too outside the game.
Yeah, I love stuff like that. I don't play games that much. I've got a really low I don't know what the right word is, but I get bored extremely quickly if I'm not creating. So there's things like Dreams on the PlayStation that is just exceptional. If you know the work of Martin Niebelung.
Yeah, Dreams, it's phenomenal application. I wish they did more with it. It's sad that it just kind of existed for 10 years and it's kind of being sunsetted now, but it was such a cool game creation engine that regular people could create. And my hope for that was that, a player could sell something to another player, but it just never kind of turned into that.
I made an active decision not to, because Martin is a good friend of mine. We've done a lot of work with Oculus before he started with Dreams, and he dived in. He's probably the main person that people would know from Dreams. He's done the most with it. But then I made an active choice of if I can't get it out, I can't do anything with it. And nearly everything else I use, everything, the iPad, the VR, everything, you can do something with what you create, and that's always very important to me. So that's why I don't, I've not done anything with the Vision Pro because I need it to have more of I need it to give me something back. I don't want to do things in a different way. I want to do what I do and then get that out and use it. I want to model and draw in, and I want to be able to do it as I do. The MetaQuest is an amazing tool, and very, very cheap. So as soon as the day that I can do that kind of work on the Vision Pro, then I'll probably buy 3 of them for the studio. I need it just to be another generation or 2 further down the line.
Sure. Yeah. The Vision Pro to me seems like a really cool way to just preview what you've created to see if it's working.
Yeah. Give me an iPad at any day, literally. Forget the forget the price. If you literally if you said you've got a choice here, a Vision Pro at this price and an iPad, even like an iPad Air, the latest iPad Air is an exceptional piece of kit. I would take that every day because I can do stuff with it from the minute I pick it up.
Sure. Total sense. Yeah.
And as far as iPad usage, what's been your kind of history with that? When did you jump into iPad? When did it become a part of your, I guess, computers for work? And
so From day one, really. So I've got a lot of history with graphic equipment. So obviously from the 90s, I was friends with Wacom and I was an evangelist for Wacom for a long, long time in the UK and Ireland and Europe. So I was spending a lot of time in, Scandinavia and around France and wherever I could go with Wacoms, because they were great to help me build my career, and good to have they filled my studio several times with equipment, so I always had Mobile Studio Pros and all of that. So I was always on the lookout for the next thing to make it much more of a mobile device. So obviously the iPhone was like, right, we can, this is different than the BlackBerry and the smartphones. And then 2010 hits with an iPad, and straight away, I was literally, the day it came out, I got one. I was like, I'm having this, even without a pencil. I was like, I can see it. I can see where this is going. So I was all over it from the minute. And I've got family members in Apple as well. So obviously the excitement is rife on launch days and stuff like that. So
yeah.
So as soon as the Pro hit, and then like 2015 the Pencil, I was kind of like straight away. There was no waiting at all. And I was doing, I didn't do many videos in the early days with it, because I was heavily doing the modeling, which you couldn't do anything on the iPad modeling in the first few years or year or two. Mm-hmm. And that's strange, because in 2015, Forger came out on the iPad, which is a sculpting app, which is still there and has been purchased by Maxon. And it's an exceptional piece of kit, but nobody really jumped on that. Now I did a little bit, but it couldn't even come close to what ZBrush could do on the desktop. So I was there. I was it's well over 10 years ago now, when we were first looking at it, and when the guy that wrote it is a guy called Javier, I think, and he worked in the mill, and I happened to be working not the mill, sorry, Passion Pictures, I think, in London, and basically I saw it develop from a before it was actually even an iPad app. So that was kind of, I'm in it now because I can see where this is going. I can really feel that this has got legs down the line, but we've got to wait for it. And there was a lot going on with VR back then. 2015, 2016 is when Lucky Palmer had sold Oculus, yep. And it was those days when everybody thought the world was going to change, and I was thinking about the MA. So the iPad was always there right from that start. Always had the top one. Every single, I did a rolling cycle every 2 years, so I just updated everything every 2 years, because the step integrations never felt like I needed them usually. And I've got, I wouldn't say hundreds, but I mean I'm littered with iPads in this place. We literally test everything the minute it comes out. Don't usually quite often get given one to have a look at. Then we decide whether it's worth an upgrade, because sometimes, and we might touch this towards the end of the interview, sometimes the upgrade is just not needed. So
sure,
my reviews of the current iPads, the iPad Pro 2024 is just not needed if you've got the previous one, because the RAM. So certainly I'm talking about for sculptors and for 2D artists.
Okay,
because
gotcha.
when you do Geekbench Pro tests on it, you're not getting any benefits above the previous model yet. I honestly believe it's built ready for what's coming, and is appearing every day now with the Apple Silicon stuff, and I can feel that the upgrade. So if you were ready for an upgrade, it's superb, But if you've got that last one, I was telling everybody, just hang fire for this. The Pencil is, I love the new Pencil, but you didn't really need an upgrade for it yet. But by next year, and certainly when we get this next one, the M4, and you get everything run, once they start to write for that, then I'm absolutely all over it. I'll be ready for that one then. And things like Nomad Sculpt and Forger and ZBrush, that they are very limited by their RAM. That you are held up by your RAM. But if quite often the machines or the model or whatever the problem is collapses before you reach your RAM limit, there's never been a time when I'm watching where I've reached my RAM limit on a 16 gig iPad. So kind of you don't need that next one. The speed of the chip is great, and the faster the chip obviously is better. But yeah, there's a.
So you'll hit some other thing in the app that crashes it before the RAM gets filled up, and it auto saves in a way where you're not losing work when that happens.
You can do, yeah. You can switch. Obviously, in all of them, there's an auto save. So ZBrush does a crash save, and Nomad Sculpt does a crash save if you have it on. I generally don't have it on for whatever stupid reason, but yeah, it's never been a problem. Neither of them are crashy apps, to be fair. ZBrush, I don't know if I've had a crash yet. And I've been on the beta for I was on a beta for 8. I was on the pre-alpha, and I don't even remember getting many crashes back then. So it's a pretty solid piece of kit. And Nomad Sculpt is as stable as it comes. I've been using that solid for 4 years, every day of my life. I've recorded 300 or 400 YouTube videos. Well, there's at least 200 plus videos just on Nomad core usage. And I've not had a crash in all that time. So
that's amazing. Yeah, and the Apple Pencil Pro, I find that click, that squeeze gesture, very satisfying. Has that been integrated into ZBrush yet?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Okay.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, so ZBrush came out. Obviously, it was hasn't been that long. It's only been a matter of weeks, really, a couple of months.
Right. Yeah. Apple probably was releasing this as they were finishing the final touches, and ZBrush are like, "Oh, we can't touch that quite yet. We're just trying to get this application out the door."
Yeah, it's strange. So obviously, it's not. It's come out and it's solid, but it's got some big stuff missing. That is not. If you don't know what you're after, it's not a problem. But this is like version 1. This is a good start, and it's got everything that you could want to get you going. But when you want to integrate it into a bit more of a professional pipeline, there's a couple of things. There's a thing called Z Modeler that we're waiting for, which is like more like a polygonal modeler, where you can manipulate more of the component parts, like the points and the edges and the faces, rather than the sculpt inside. That's not built in yet, so I assume at some point that will come on. So, but it's a rolling beta team, so they've developed. Maxon are putting a ton of money behind it, I guess, because they want this to be the de facto tool on the iPod for sculpting. And I know that the goal is that there's an end-to-end pipeline, so that you can start something in a sketch, you can model it, texture it, high poly and low poly it, and get it out for a game all on the iPad. And that's not there yet. There's plenty. Mm-hmm. There's plenty of tools that are close to it, and you can almost get there. But the learning curve is insanely high compared to something like Blender. If you go back to your Mac or your PC. But I reckon this year, maybe another year, and we'll have a full end-to-end game pipeline. Pretty sure.
That'll be really, really awesome. And the Apple Pencil Pro, I'm also curious if the gyroscope and any of that would benefit ZBrush, or if that kind of those, twisting the pencil as you're drawing on the screen, if that would be a benefit at all.
Yeah, I think it all adds to. I mean, I don't know if that's coded for that, because I personally don't use the new pencil at the moment. The one that I had went back, the one that we were testing, and I didn't. I honestly took the decision to wait until more apps. I just felt like it wasn't. I didn't get anything even out of Procreate I didn't feel like it was ready. I felt like the pencil was another one that was just lining up ready. Lovely piece of kit, lovely little tweaks, squeezing the barrel. I agree that there is a thing about the haptics that just makes it feel better in your hand. And I know there's people developing with, they're making stuff with, and you'll know people that are doing it. But I just didn't feel like it was an investment time for me, or for me to push it. Yeah.
That's the adult responsible thing to do.
Yeah, it's not rare. It is rare with me. That it's normally just buy it. And I can't believe I haven't bought a Vision Pro. I just assumed I would get one, but I've been, I've tried to be a bit more mature with I've got too much stuff sat in my office that just gets purchased and sits there. So if it's going to be our money, if it's going to be the company money, I do a little test now where I just say, right, will it make me money within 2 years? And if it doesn't, if I can't say yes, then I don't do it. So that's a mature response, which I don't normally have.
And for you, the 12.9 inch model is the go-to one just because that extra screen space is essential for that type of work you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I had all the minis, kept buying them because I love them as a note-taking device, and I love the size because they match my moleskin, which I used to carry. But then I got fed up of carrying a 12.9 and a mini was, it's just too much. I just didn't need them. So I use one of the minis on a drone, and I use one of the minis as a wall device, like a media device on the wall in a particular part of the office. But yeah, the 12.9 is. I mean, I would, if you announced now on your podcast that they were releasing a 16-inch iPad, I would order 6 now today.
Yeah.
I literally would order it right now today. But yeah, they, and I get why they probably don't, because of I'm not everybody. I'm a creator, and I get that it's too big. A lot of people have told me that would just be ridiculously big, but then it would be a dream tool for me. It would be literally a dream, especially now with the, if we get more RAM and we get, that the chipset is exceptional. I have to say, I just think that they've got it so right. I just, I've been dreaming of this type of kit all of my, since I was reading William Gibson in the 80s and watching Star Trek with pads and what, this is now, I'm one of them, and probably you yourself, we've got what we asked for almost. It's just, just little bits of it. I don't care about a new phone and like 10th of a nanometer off the phone, or a refined bevel, or a shiny bit of this, or what, or a new icon. Or I want to be able to make what I make, and the iPad's the dream tool at the moment, and just needs to go one step further with that extra size.
Yeah, for the longest time there were rumors of this larger iPad, but those have faded. So I hope they're still working on it back there.
I hope so. I mean, I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I get that it's too big for general usage, but I mean, there's so many people in the industry who use iPads now.
Yeah, call it the iPad Studio, and it's more of a professional kind of tool. Yeah,
and and just the fact that you can sit it next to your Mac and it's an extended screen alone makes it. That is such a cool feature.
Yeah, and it works so well. Like I finally integrated a Mac into my workflow, and it's just wild. Like in the menu system of any application, you can go Window and say move to that iPad sitting next to your Mac. It's not like you don't have to dig in system settings to try to like configure it. Yeah,
I love it. I do love it.
Do you outside like sidecars we just talked about, any other uses of the iPad and kind of your life outside of the sculpting world?
Oh yeah, I mean, as I said, I'm moving into full time. I'm not closing my company down. I'm keeping the company going. It's just that me as an operator, I'm not going to be creating as much. So I'm teaching all the time now, and I teach around the world as well as whenever I can. So the Mac, sometimes it's too much, and the iPad just sits right in. I live on Notes. Notes is my go-to for. I literally, all my life gets poured into Notes, and then it gets disseminated out around the different places. So, as we're talking now, I've got 2 notepads open. The iPad is literally to my side here on my hand. I draw on it every single day. I professionally sell botanical illustrations. Nearly all of them are started on either in my moleskin and then just a quick picture and then finished on the iPad. But there isn't. I don't know. I probably have my iPad with me more than I have my phone with me in a way. Obviously, the phone's always there, but the iPad's probably on more. It's just a very, very important part. I probably would say now, especially because ZBrush is now on it. If you that old chestnut question about if you just had one device, I'd have the iPad.
Yeah.
Over everything,
sure.
Over the Mac, over my everything. For a creator, you can animate on it. You can, Procreate Dreams is again another one that's not quite there, but it's good enough. Procreate is just sensational. And now, obviously, with Nomad Sculpt and ZBrush, then it makes it like the golden ticket for me.
Do you have much experience with Dreams? Because that's another application. I couldn't find anyone to talk to about it. All the YouTubers were too busy creating YouTube content with it, and
Yeah, I mean, I teach it. So it's got So the only reason I haven't gone fully hell for leather in it is because it doesn't have all of the tools from Procreate yet. So as soon as it has everything that allows me to draw what I draw within my layer stack and in the timeline, then it's just then it will be a dream tool. It's almost like an oversight for me. I just feel like if they get a couple of iterations down the line, and I'll probably start doing tutorials with it. But I'm teaching students to use it now. I'm teaching master's students to use it with their work, and I'm teaching bachelor students to use it, even though I don't professionally use it.
Right, yeah. Very cool. Yeah, that's an application that came out. I was like, this looks impressive. Like, it's just like what you're able to do with this.
Yeah. No, it's good. It's definitely good. I mean, sometimes you have to pick your battles, don't you? So what I try to do is, I'm a bit of a laser focused person, so I kind of go deep on something quickly, and then I go and do the next thing quickly. So if I'm heavily into using ZBrush I'm not dipping in and out of ZBrush and then Nomad. I'll just spend a couple of months being the best at that, and then I'll move on. So I'm going to hit a time when I'll jump onto Dreams, and then I'll integrate it into, I'm not an animator though, so I love animation. Because I'm a hirer, I'm in the industry when I hire teams. When I hire people, I want an animator, I just hire an animator. I don't hire somebody who's an all-rounder. I want an animator, I'll pay for an animator. And they generally aren't on the iPad. The people that I meet on the iPad are all-rounders. So I'll get an animator that works in Toon Boom or something like that.
Makes sense, yeah. So any other general iPad thoughts before we move on to ZBrush and digital sculpting?
Not really, no, other than the fact that it is, as I've already said, it's become from 2015 definitely became my go-to tool. So that's nearly 10 years now. It's not far off 10 years of becoming my main tool, which is I thought Wacom or SenseLabs or I thought one of the other graphic companies would have got something that would come close to it, and they tried with the Mobile Studio Pro. There's just not much out there. Samsung have got a few things, but they're such a glitchy, that everything breaks or is a problem, or anything that's a standalone drawing tablet is woefully down the level. iPad just has it right. They've got such a, they've spent such an amount of time developing it, and it's absolutely liquid. As you know, the drawing experience with the Apple Pencil compared to any other products, when you do it side by side, it's not even close. iPad wins. Even if you hate Apple, even if you're not an Apple fanboy, you can't deny it. It's exceptional. It's liquid.
It is amazing that Google kind of just gave up on working on their tablet operating system. I mean, they have the foldables now and stuff. I think that's probably the direction they're headed, but it's wild to me that Apple just won this and we're not even going to bother. Really.
Yeah, it is like a bit of a give. I mean, you can get Nomad Sculpt on an Android, but when you use it, so for example, the big reasons that it falls down is like they haven't done enough work on the palm rejection. So what happens is you just get to hate the experience because you're always tapping the screen with your palm. Well, that's just that's just software. That's a case of put the hours in, hire the right people, fix that code, and then release it. And they are they're not game changers. Sorry, they're roadblocks that stop you. If you can't reliably use a product to draw, if it's getting in the way, if it's dropping you out of the experience of being an artist, then it's gone. It's pointless. Back to pen and pencil. And don't get me wrong, I always tell people to go back to pen and pencil if at any time. I mean, I draw again every day in pen and pencil, even though I live on my iPad, because the skills are built in the hand and the brain and the experience. It doesn't matter if it's the cheapest HB pencil on a bit of scrappy paper or a Wacom that's $3,500. The skill is you and your brain and your time and experience, and that's a big learning for youngsters these days. You don't need the flashiest piece of kit.
No, you really don't. So ZBrush and digital sculpting. So we've talked about how these tools are used in the movie realm and video game realm to create these digital assets. I was also curious, do sculptors use these tools as well as a way to experiment without, using real world materials, or is that a crossover that those people really don't want to learn something like this?
There's no set standard for it, and when digital sculpting first stepped in, there was obviously, like AI is now, there was a rallying against it, going, you'll never get the experience, you'll never equal what we do with sculpting. So, and I was a sculptor, I was a physical sculptor as well, although I didn't really do much on movies for physical. But a lot of my friends are physical sculptors only, and the best digital sculptors, bar none, are the ones who have come with the skill of sculpting already, and then they learn where the buttons are. The weakest are the CG people who aren't sculptors, and they don't understand anatomy and form and shape and silhouette and lighting and all of that. And then they learn to be a great technical operator of a digital sculpting program, but the stuff they turn out is weak in all the other ways. So there are really two. If you want to refine it, there's two main groups. There's the people who have never understood what this is, and they just come and they see, oh my god, I can make stuff now on the iPad, and that's generally the people I sell to with my courses, and they're the people that I'm introducing, using the iPad as a gateway into digital sculpting and wherever that goes. And the other option is that the people like me who have been in the industry, who want to be able to use it on a train, on a couch, and they want an experience that can continue from the office. Now, traditional sculptors, some find it hard. I mean, I've trained people who've never used a mouse, let alone a Wacom stylus, and I'm not exaggerating. I literally have had to do one-to-one sessions, which is fine, because those people are the people that have made some of the best movie products you've ever seen. Some of the top of the tree sculptors. But the way that I framed it in the last 20 years is that, and especially because I make money teaching it, is that I go in with the attitude that, look, this is the next tool in your sculpting toolbox. It's not a replacement. So if you want to carry on with your clay, then fine. But just add this to your skill set so you're more hireable across the board. And you could say, yes, I can do digital, and yes, I can do physical and scan it and then tweak it in digital. And that's the way it works best. And now it's non-threatening. If you look at the forum, the biggest forums online of people who are into digital sculpting, they would all despise AI as a general rule, but they would all embrace digital sculpting. Well, I'm old enough to remember when that wasn't the case. So you don't really get people vilified for doing digital sculpting and posting it on a unless the forum is specifically clay only and physical only. But people recognise that the skills, the ability to sculpt is the same. It's just a different tool, and I think that it's people respect someone, especially if you start from nothing. If you just take somebody's model and then sculpt over it, that's obviously seen as a bit weaker, and you see a lot of that on ArtStation, and you can see that it got to the point where you could see the model that was used underneath it, where people are posting stuff that they don't realise they haven't changed it enough. So
that reminds me of, in the music realm, of composers initially maybe frowning digital composition tools like Finale and Sibelius with like playback, so you can preview what you're writing. It's like real composers don't. It's like, no, but it's a tool, and it doesn't replace the musicians performing your piece. It's just I can give you some good examples where, I mean, I think I'm old enough and ugly enough to have been through these a few times. So another really interesting one is when you're doing face replacements. So if you think of films from Coraline onwards, so Coraline, Box Trolls, Kubo and the Two Strings, stop motion at the highest end, they're done with 3D printing. So you sculpt it, and then digitally sculpt it, and then change the faces and print each of the faces, and then the animator changes the faces. That's obviously the tech. Well, a lot of people online will criticise that as going, well, that's not traditional stop motion. That isn't how we do it. And I had a long time where I thought that was probably the right kind of answer to some degree. And then I started thinking, hang on a minute, do those same people, and I challenged a few people on this over time. I said, right, would you be able to then go into a darkroom, and can you chop up this line of celluloid for me and sellotape it together? And I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm like, well, you're using digital editing tools, you're using Premiere and Final Cut Pro. That's not a traditional stop motion. It used to be done on celluloid. Well, that's ridiculous kind of argument. So we can make the argument at every level of technology.
and it's about, someone can't define what is artistic and the correct way, because art by its very nature is fluid and changes, and that's why the world is in turmoil with AI, because there's so many differing opinions, and is it stolen from a generative point of view, and is it actually yours in any way? Do you own it? So we've been through this a lot. This is the worst. This is the most volatile and most disruptive I've ever known. But again, you can't just shut down and give up because it's disrupting you. So
right. Yeah. Stop motion to me is such a fun avenue to just explore. When I was younger, I used iStop motion by Boinks, and I had a xenomorph action figure from the Alien movies, and it was just wild to me, just like, I'm making my action figures move. This is just
it's incredible, isn't it?
It's a wild thing. It's like a little kid, to play with that kind of stuff.
Well, there's a fun fact, actually. So there's a magazine that's been going for 20 odd years called 3D World magazine, and strangely enough, I'm literally looking at it right now in my office. So today, or this month, is their final issue, and I've kind of written for them and done tutorials for them all of that time, all of those years, and a few months ago, I managed to get a xenomorph on the cover, which was just done on the iPad. And I made a big thing, if anybody wants to look it up, just look up 3D World covers, and then you'll see a kind of xenomorph. That's all done on the iPad, the entire thing. And I thought that's a nice stake in the ground, really, because no one else has done that. No one's gone from iPad to cover of a it's a good distribution magazine. It's got a lot of legacy. And the final cover is, again, it's here right now. The final cover's got Wild Robot on it as the featured article, and then just in the top right corner is a picture of ZBrush on the iPad because I've done the tutorial on it. But I just thought it was a nice touch to be. I was there at the beginning and I'm there at the end on the cover. I just thought, and we are evolving as artists so much. It's just nice to see that little juxtaposition of all of that on the cover there. But it's kind of emotional in a way because
I know that that film franchise has a lot of history in England. A lot of production was done there. Ridley Scott for his films, and I think, but Alien 3, I think was that one done there? I forget.
Yeah, Alien 3 was wasn't it? The northeast in kind of Tyneside, somewhere like that, on the coast.
Yeah, I thought so. Yeah, I'm trying to remember, but yeah,
I'm pretty sure it was a desolate beach, desolate beach out there somewhere. Yeah.
Yes. So as far as ZBrush, something I'm curious about is you mentioned the end-to-end, for video game creation. The ZBrush output, when you're done with your model, you're able to throw that into Unreal pretty easily, then animate that asset fully, or what's that kind of workflow look like?
So no, not today. So anything that's going to go into Unreal needs good topology underneath. So generally, what
that's
you do,
like skeletal structure,
not skeletal structure. No. So anything that's going to go in any game whatsoever needs to be relatively low polygon. So it has to have a low amount.
I see.
Yeah, it has to have a low enough amount of polygons, and the way that the polygons are organized in the flow of the polygons has to be done in such a way that, one, it carries coordinates to be able to put textures on, and that's called UV mapping. So you have to have a low poly model, then it has to be UV mapped, and then it has to carry what we call high poly data, which is, people listening to this might have heard of things like normal maps and displacement maps. And what that does is it effectively lets you see your model looking like it's the high poly model that you've sculpted, but it's running around the screen on a low poly model. So it's done at the render stage of Unreal. So what you need, so the sculpt that you've done, when it comes out, needs that underneath it, so to speak. It has to have a low poly model that comes out with it, and that's a process. Now, in ZBrush Core in ZBrush on the desktop, there's a thing called Z-Remesher that remeshes it to a low poly. Then you project the high polygon data onto it, and then that's what those maps go out to Unreal Engine. That's the tiny little bit that's missing. And I think that's what's going to be coming very, very, very soon. I think it's just a case of they've rushed it out. You can do it in Nomad Sculpt already. That's already there. But that's the big thing, really. Getting that bit out is the sticker at the moment. You can do a reasonably low poly. You can get stuff in that isn't going to be rigged and animated, but you don't really generally want to do that. There's much better ways of doing it at the moment.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah, as I watched the Last of Us documentaries, I'm remembering their scenes of them working on the game, and everything was that more low poly thing that they're actually working on.
Yeah, it's still there. You can't get away from it. I mean, everybody's saying Unreal Engine 5, and it will do it all for you in the future, and I'm sure it will, and I'm sure AI will do it in the future. But at the moment, today, we need good. One of the biggest skills that is missing in the industry is making good quality low poly topology that can be rigged and animated. That's quite lacking overall. It's getting better, but that's still a really good skill to have.
Yeah. So when I think of digital sculpting, something that just comes to mind is that you're able to integrate a lot of different things. Like I imagine sculptors can add, fur from actual animals that they, add to a different sculpture, but it seems more natural to be working with fur and creating really real world representations of, like, you can sculpt a human in ZBrush, I'd imagine, and make it look pretty realistic. I guess my question is, like, the workflow of integrating all these different kind of assets. Like, is that?
Yeah, again,
ZBrush. World?
Yeah, ZBrush doesn't do hair. It has what's called a fiber brush, which is great,
okay.
and you can make it look good, but you can't get it out. So again, as I said earlier on in the podcast, if I can't get it out, I can't really use it. So nobody would make their hair in ZBrush and get it into a game.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. You need an in-game solution to do hair and fur. And if you think back to, there's all different ways of doing it. So one way is to put like an alpha map onto a polygon, and that's called a hair card. And that's how you see it in films. If you think of things like Ice Age, where you've got the mammoth, he was made up of cards, and the cards have an alphaed out hair on them, so they look like hair. So that's one way of doing it. And another way is a full spline based version of hair, which is a lot of these modern, I think the Unreal's got it now, and certainly for movies, obviously it's all built into Maya and stuff like that, but the movie pipeline and the game pipeline are completely different ways of doing it. One's a rendered frame by frame thing, and one's a real time render. It's done live. So
yeah, no, hair has always been the last big tentpole of technology breakthroughs. I know, like Aloy's hair and Horizon was a big deal that they could make it flow the way they did. And I know Monsters Inc., that was the big thing with Sully. Like, they finally got the hair working.
Yeah, so that's RenderMan with a full hair. That is that's the pinnacle for screen for stylized characters. And we're going back a lot. I saw it in Wild Robot last night. We're going back to a lot of the stylized way of doing it. Making it look very painterly, which is again a whole different technology. But it's horses for courses. It depends what you need. If you need photoreal on a photorealistic human, then you've got to put the work in. You're not going to get that out of ZBrush on the iPad. You're not even going to get that out of ZBrush on the desktop. It's not for that.
Okay.
It's the ZBrush is for the hard parts, and it could be hard or soft. But if you think of anything that's ethereal, so anything that's like hair or smoke or water or particles or stars or anything like that, you need to go to another solution, and that's always been the same. You can paint them. If you want stills, it's fine. You can do an approximation. You can do. I do really, really cool looking hair cards in Nomad Sculpt that make it look like it's real hair, but you can't do anything with it, and you can't see it from all angles in the same way. It's not for that, and it'll be a while if it ever. It's almost another app, really.
And none of those apps kind of exist on iPad today. That all is the desktop tool.
Yeah, not really. Again, you can do hair cards. So again, I'm pretty sure I could do it in ZBrush now. But where it goes from there, so I could make it look really cool. And there are, ZBrush does have a fiber brush that I've said, which is like little splines that you then render as hair. And I have been told that it is possible to export them out and use those splines to go into Maya and use them as a solution for, convert the splines to hair splines. But there are better native tools off the iPad that just do it out of the box. And two, it's a lot of effort, really. So I've never been the person who just sticks with something because it's the only thing I've got. I would use whatever the best tool for the job is, really.
Gotcha. Yeah. And you've mentioned Nomad Sculpt and Forager. Where do those apps kind of fail and succeed where ZBrush, steps in? Like where are the strengths and weaknesses of those different apps?
Well, we can forget Forager because when Maxon bought it, they put it behind a paywall and didn't really develop it more. From a sculpting point of view, it didn't develop after about 3 years ago. What it did develop with is the low polygon side, so you can do like point by point edge polygon modeling. So Forager's good for that. ZBrush can't do that yet on the iPad. So Forager for polygonal modeling is one of two solutions. There's another one called Valen's 3D app that you should have a look at, and your listeners should have a look at. That's a guy in LA that's developing that. He's doing a really good job with that one. But if you park them, so let's go back to sculpting. So your two big options are obviously Nomad and ZBrush. And Nomad has one really powerful thing that ZBrush doesn't have, which is real-time rendering. So you can basically do what are called post-processing filters, which means, again, if anyone knows Blender, it's got two types of render engines. It's got Blender Eevee and Blender Sigils. Sigils is a true full-on frame renderer, like a brute force, if they call it that, renderer. And Eevee is a real-time render, like, for example, Marmoset Toolbag or actually Unreal Engine's output. So we've got an approximation of that technology in Nomad Sculpt, and ZBrush yet doesn't have that. So that is, some people will not go to ZBrush for that exact reason. But then on the other side, so that's one of the big reasons. But with ZBrush, obviously it's got a lot of money behind it because it's got a big company. Nomad is a single developer, one guy called Stefan. He just develops it on his own. Maxon's now got a massive team with some good funding. And they're developing things like, so for example, there is a cloth simulation in ZBrush, which you don't get on the iPad at all. So you literally can simulate falling cloth, which is exceptionally good. It's on the normal normal ZBrush version as well, and it's in Blender. So it has something called Z-spheres, which is where I've just done a video on that on my YouTube channel if anybody wants to see it. But it's like stringing an armature together to then sculpt on. That's not in any other app. And because it's got such a history of being developed, and because it runs mainly with CPU, not GPU, ZBrush is liquid with its sculpting. So there's certain types of sculpting that just looks so much better on in ZBrush. But you, without knowing the industry very, very well, you'd be hard pushed to decide which is the better of the two in just core sculpting, because Nomad's so good. So I think what ZBrush has got is it's come late to the party and it hasn't got all of its tools out yet. When they're out, then it will be a different ball game.
Nomad Sculpt, is that a subscription application as well, or is that a paid upfront one?
No, that is. I'm literally just doing a video on this exact subject. So Nomad is £15 one-off payment.
Okay, so that's a big difference if you're someone that just dabbles in it and doesn't need it every day as a subscription. You know?
And that goes back to again, I've done a lot of research on this topic, is who's using what tools, and 80% of people on the iPad are going to go to Nomad. You'd have to. There's one big question straight away, which if you did a flow chart, and this is exactly what I'm writing at the moment, is if you did a flow chart and your first question was, will you buy a subscription product or not? Yes or no. If it's no, you go straight to Nomad and forget ZBrush completely. If you're willing to pay a subscription and step into a more professional world, then you start looking at reasons to or not to use ZBrush.
Yeah, and subscriptions I think are great for certain apps, and it depends on the person. Like for me, I do video editing once every so often, so I'm like, I'll sign up for Final Cut for iPad and then cancel right away because I know it's like I'm just doing this one video and I'm out. But so that's where LumaFusion is great, where I just have it. I can just launch it whenever I need it, and it's not that often. So I imagine like some people I'm just going to dabble in sculpting. It's not like an everyday thing. Maybe once every couple months I might, try something out there versus someone that uses it daily for their work. That seems like a subscription would make sense there.
Yeah. I mean, they give you a free version. There's obviously a cut down version, so you can step in and learn it all. and it does give you a lot. But if you get in any way into it, you're instantly hit a wall where something isn't there. And I think you get like 10 brushes instead of like 100. So there's lots of. You can definitely test it to a point where you can decide if it's for you before you need to spend a penny. So they've done a great job of that. And you can sculpt and get it. There's no import export restrictions to worry about. It just works. So
nice.
So I have to be quite clear. You can go in and step in and try it.
Do you know if they let you if someone sends you a ZBrush file from a paid version and you just have the free version, will you be able to do a non-edit open, just like look
at the moment you can and that is one of the when we talk about that other sort of like 15 or 20% of people which are professionals who already have a Maxon 1 license, which is the ZBrush where you get ZBrush from, you instantly get ZBrush on the iPad as just for free. It's part of your Maxon license, and you can literally with a single click be in and out of your desktop on your iPad. That for the people at the upper end of the people who are already using a Maxon license for me as a professional is £1,500 a year. So I need to I need to be in my own little calculations. For every license I have, I've got to be turning over at least £1,500 with that tool before it even breaks even, let alone the cost of me or an artist learning it. So a Maxon license is not cheap in this day and age. Now, for someone who can, write that off against a job, if I'm doing a job, I would build in the fact that I'm already paying thousands of pounds a year for those licenses. But we need new artists to come to this field and be able to be really, really good with this stuff before they ever have to pay a penny. Because we need to trade, and that's why I love things like. So whether you love or hate Autodesk, they give away all their stuff to all students in all universities. So I train people on Maya because it's free. I don't train them on Blender because nobody is hiring. I don't know, overall, nobody's really going, I want loads of Blender artists. They want modelers that use Maya and, a lot of those more professional tools. Even though I love Blender, I'm not a bigot. I do love Blender. It's just that nobody wants it in the wider professional world.
Sure. Yeah, and I was going to ask you. So the subscription to ZBrush on iPad is just for the iPad, but if you are already there on desktop with a subscription, that works on iPad because that's the more expensive subscription that would go both ways. And the iPad one is far less expensive, so naturally does not give you access to the desktop version as well.
Exactly, yeah.
You mentioned earlier anatomy, and I was curious. So when you're creating, say, an animal in ZBrush, is it the best practice to build out like a skeletal structure, add muscles on top of that, and really build the entire animal? Or do you only really care about what that top final layer looks like, and you can kind of, estimate what's underneath?
No, it's the first one. You have to, and that's where Z-Spheres is good because you can get all your proportions right in a rig in a basic shape. If anyone doesn't know, just do a quick search for Z-Spheres, and you'll see exactly what I mean. It's a string of spheres that you can shape and size and scale and animate a little bit in terms of it's got what's called forward kinematics, which means you can move a leg and the foot and the hand or whatever move, or you can move the spine and the rest of the body moves while you're making the shape. So we would, and every sculptor will tell you this, even physical sculptors will tell you this, you would never start working on detailing a nose when you haven't done your armature for the entire length of the arms and the legs and the body. So it's the same digitally. We fully make the shape, so we get all of the work done in its basic block. We call most sculptors would use a terminology like this. So we'd start with block out, and that's where we refine we got one head, one body, two arms, two legs, a tail, wings. You wouldn't do all of that and then add wings later. You'd add it all in block out first. They're called your primary forms or block out. Then you'd move to secondary forms. And your secondary would be your muscle layer. So you'd work out, right, roughly there'd be a bulk of muscle around the deltoids, around the biceps, around the forearm, and then you'd learn, over time you learn all of these muscle groups. And I always advise people to learn human anatomy first, because that gives you basic mammalian anatomy, and you get asked.
Yeah, I was wondering, like, it sounds like to be a great animator, you should, or a sculptor, you should also look at
studying anatomy.
100%, 100%. Yeah, totally different skill set, but you need it if you're gonna. If you're gonna sculpt anything that's alive, you need reference and you need to know muscles. So yeah, that the process that you described is that we block it out, then we do the secondaries, and then we do the finals or the tertiaries, and that would be the skin, the fat layers, any detail, and then onwards from there. But yeah, it's exactly the same in the real world. If you start. And it's exactly the same with a pen and pencil. If you were to start drawing a creature and detailing the eyes and the ears, and then suddenly realise that your proportions are all out, you've got a problem. You have to do sketch lines and go, right, I need my arms and legs to this length and my body to this length. So yeah, it's exactly that.
In the movie world, that asset, having all those assets too, I'd imagine, like if a creature gets like a gunshot wound, it could go through those layers and even reach bone and see all that, right?
Yeah, if you get to movie level, you would make a skeleton, you would make a muscle layer, you'd physically make it, you'd literally sculpt the skeleton fully, you'd sculpt all the muscle layer, and quite often that can be dynamic as well. So as in the muscles will contract and move and actually respond as the muscles respond, and then you would make a skin layer, you would sculpt the final layer, and then you'd composite all them together. So if it does get, sometimes we get shows on like National Geographic, you have to sometimes make the internal workings and show the digestive system, and you have to show the sexual parts, and you have to show a head itself. If you think about a head, you've got the brain, the skull, the tongue, the fat layers, the eyes, the hair, the jaw moving. There's so much on there. It's a huge amount.
Right. Yeah. In the King Kong battle, where King Kong's playing with like the broken jawbone after he rips the T-Rex's mouth open, kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely. That it all has to be factored in when you're planning it.
Yeah. So with ZBrush, you've been teaching people for a long time now on this application. And what I'm sure as you've been teaching, you've ran into where ZBrush on desktop kind of stumps people, where the user interface is a bit hard to understand. In what ways do you think the iPad version will be kind of easier to get people caught up with the basics of ZBrush, and then maybe if they want even more going to the desktop, it would be an easier transition than starting at the desktop maybe?
Yeah, it's a difficult one because it's a non-standard interface. That's the biggest criticism that people say of ZBrush is the non-standard interface. So it's not like a file menu drop down in the same way. And there are some certain things, like we have something called drop into canvas, where a model will stick to the canvas and it looks like it's gone. So that does cause a problem, and those problems to some degree are still there on the iPad, but they seem to have cleaned it up a bit. So in my latest reviews, it looks like they've just made it a little tiny bit easier to get through that. It's still difficult if you don't know any of it. You need someone to show you how to do it. But the minute you're through it, it's quite simple. Once there's like a brick wall of learning. Once you're kind of through that, you're almost initiated into the club, and then you can take it from there.
I gotcha. Yeah. And the iPad you mentioned is a little bit, they've cleaned up some stuff, or it's a little bit easier to dive into that version?
Yeah, it seems so. What from this year's experience with it, the fact that there's no keyboard strokes, so obviously everything on the iPad is built onto the screen. So your things like your Command, Option, Shift, and all of that is built right on. So your right hand is on the screen, and your left hand is using the pen. Or that's for me. Obviously, I'm left-handed, and reverse it for right-handers. But it just feels a little bit more fluid once you get going. Once you understand those 2 or 3 basic moves to get you going, it is definitely easier to teach it. I've been teaching people this month with it, and I've found it just flows a little bit easier. But I also have found that it is a very complex tool when you're first coming to it. So the stacking of the menus on the smaller screen can be a little bit of a challenge when you're used to a larger monitor. But better, definitely better than the desktop version. My gut feeling is, and I don't know, I've got no inside information, but I think that the desktop version will reflect the iPad. I think they'll reverse engineer it slowly over time. So what's gone well in this, on the iPad, I think they'll push it back to the desktop eventually. It's UI and UX stuff, isn't it? So it's user experience. If it's working, then people are going to want it. They won't want one on the iPad and one on the desktop. So I think next 2 to 3 years, I think we'll see a bit of an evolution where they converge at some point again.
Do you personally have a preference towards that more tactile approach of the iPad versus using keyboard shortcuts in the old way of working?
Yeah, do you know what? Yeah, in a way I do. Yeah, I'm a big fan of not getting in the way of what I do. I don't like technology getting in the way of anything. I just want to do my thing, and I don't want to have to remember tons and tons of shortcuts, and I don't want to be hunting and pecking for keys. And a lot of people will tell you, and I'm one of them, is that you don't actually need to know a great deal to be good at using a sculpting tool. You just need, maybe 20 or 30 things really solidly under your belt, and everything else can be learned later. So, I like anything where I don't drop out. It's almost like storytelling. Mm-hmm. If you drop out of the story, it's ruined for you. So when I'm sculpting, I don't want to have to, if I'm in the flow and I'm making a creature, I don't want to have to stop. I want to just be able to make what I want and reach all of the tools simply. That's one of the reasons I love sculpting with voxels in VR, because you just spray stuff in the air and it just becomes what you want it to make. There's no thought other than press. And so here's me and here's my art in front of me, and that's what I like. They're not there yet with that, but then nobody is. None of them are the golden ticket for all of it yet. We don't have that yet. The nearest you can get to that is clay in the real world, but then that comes with its own challenges.
Do you think ZBrush will ever create a Vision OS version of their app that's more kind of, Vision OS first, where you are working in the three-dimensional world? And
I don't know. I hope so.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is, you've essentially got a Mac on your head, haven't you, with a Vision Pro? So, I mean, you can do it. And with ZBrush being driven mainly by CPU, I don't see any reason why they can't do it. Is there a need for it? Is there a financial need for it yet? Probably not just yet. Probably because there's not enough people with a Vision Pro. And again, I don't know the numbers, but my gut feeling with, my looking into the industry, I don't see a lot of people in university or in industry using a Vision Pro for anything other than watching telly. When it's integrated, and when and I know a lot of people in the AR world, mixed reality, they're not using the Vision Pro in the way that I think Apple want them to. So why would anybody spend money on that just yet? That needs to be an established tool.
It's the chicken and the egg thing. Like, if ZBrush had this amazing Vision OS first app, would that inspire the people that would use that tool we actually need one now, right?
And then you'd get people like me. We're called micro influencers. So, people like me would jump on it and I'd start selling it. But then I have to go to an audience and say, at the moment, here's a $4,000 piece of equipment for you to do something you can't make any money with. If it was £1,000 headset and it was a fully developed app, then I'd be thinking about it in a different case. You have to step back to the business world and the fact of how much this stuff costs.
Sure. Yeah.
I just don't. I mean, I don't know what you're seeing in your part of the world, but nobody is really selling it to people like me. Nothing that Apple are doing is selling that product to me. MetaQuest, absolutely. The Quest is an exceptional piece of kit, and I'm not a fan of Facebook overall. It's not a world I like, but what I can do with Gravity Sketch on a headset is unbelievable. If Apple could just give me that alone, I'd be happy.
Yeah, and then the price point of Meta is definitely a different kind of class of product. Yes, and the iPad version, back to ZBrush, you've tried the keyboard shortcuts and they're just not there.
No, they are there. They are there. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. You so if you put the folio on it, you can use it pretty much as the desktop version. But obviously, then the problem is when it's in a folio, you've got a hand that's hovering because it's just why would you? You might as well go back to a mouse at that point.
Yeah, one workflow I could see is not a folio, but an external Bluetooth keyboard that's to the side. As you're drawing and whatnot, have that to the side. If you need to do a quick keyboard shortcut, maybe that would be a tool to add to the arsenal.
Yeah, that could definitely work. Yeah, I haven't tested anything yet. I do some work with 3D connections with the space mice and stuff like that. And if I had a space mouse attached to my hand, that definitely would work. But then we're stepping away from the mobile option. Why would I do that if I've got, most people that are doing that and have got that kind of ability, they've generally got a Mac or a PC near them. So again, it's not something I'm thinking about focusing on. I just want to focus on the mobile aspect.
Makes sense. Yeah, I could see with the cost end of things for maybe students that don't have access to the full ZBrush on desktop, that being the way out. Yeah. So for those that haven't sculpted anything before in their entire life, and they want to try ZBrush for free in the free version here, what are some of your just general tips and suggestions you'd have for those getting started?
So the best thing to do is literally just to dive in, open up a sphere, and there's 3 or 4 tools that if you just play with them for a few days, you'll be fine. So you basically just open ZBrush up, open up a sphere on the screen, and then with your pencil, just get used to firstly the move tool, and then that basically just allows you to pull the clay around. Once you've got used to that, and this is in the free one that I'm talking about. So move would be your first one. Clay buildup adds and removes clay. So then you're taking and adding clay and moving your model around. So if you can use move, clay buildup, and then there's a thing where you want to smooth your clay. So this is like running your thumb across the clay, and that's just holding the shift key. Now the shift key, obviously that sounds like it's on a keyboard, but right, there's a little sphere on the screen that has all of your keys on it. If you just pop your thumb on that on the screen, that reverses the brush. So for example, if you're adding clay and then you hold down the shift, then it will smooth that clay down. And there's another button on there that would reverse it. So that's like pushing your thumb into the clay. So if you've got them under your belt, just those 3 or 4 things, you can make something straight away. You don't need any other experience other than that. You don't need to learn any of the technical mesh things or anything like that. Just literally get used to doing that, pulling out noses, sculpting lips. One you could add to that for make it a little bit more professional is the flatten tool. So for example, if you pull out a lip, you want to flatten the underside of it because that's how lips are. There's a plane change, we call it. And say for example, an eyebrow down a forehead down to the eyebrow, you might want to do a turn there with the flatten tool. If you can just practice like that, you'd find, if you've never ever used it and you're listening to me now and this is the first time, just go and open a sphere, pull it around to the shape of a head, and literally just boom, you'll be in. You'll love it. It's not difficult to just make stuff.
And is clay the primary kind of tool within ZBrush?
It acts as clay. That everything that you've got in there, it acts as a substance. So it's not like sculpting with marble where you remove. You're not chipping away at something. You're taking something and adding something to it. And the nearest.
So everything acts like clay, even if it doesn't look like clay.
Yes, yeah. Pretty much, you're making a shape in 3D space. You're emulating the real world by making a shape in 3D space. So Z-spheres is one way of starting with a shape that you then sculpt onto. You've got you can mesh things into other things. So you could bring in a nose and add it on. You could bring in an ear, but that's much more technical. It's using something called Dynamesh, which is where you're meshing things together. That's like as if in the real world you'd take a sphere, make a head, and then off on the side you'd make an ear and then stick it on the head. That you can do that as well, but it's still all. I mean, the clue's in the name, really. It's a sculpting app, so you're effectively emulating sculpting.
I see. Yeah. And is the adding, like smudging your finger over the clay, is that sensitive to pressure on the Apple Pencil?
Absolutely.
Like if you press harder?
Yeah,
it is.
Okay. Absolutely. That's one of the key components. Yeah, the more you press, the more you get.
And as far as like artistic background, how vital is that, would you say, with this kind of art form?
Well, a background's not essential, but obviously you've got to have a desire to want to make something. So you've got to want to be, you don't need to be an artist. There's loads of examples of different use cases. There's toy makers, there's game people. There's illustrators use it for laying out a scene. That you don't need a background in art, but obviously it's an art tool. So
you'll be getting to build that.
Yeah. It's like saying, would you buy flowers if you're a gardener? Well, anyone can buy flowers, but you don't have to be a horticultural expert. But you've got to have a desire to like flowers. I think it's another way to make cool stuff. That's all it is.
Yeah. So one thing I'm curious about, say you're creating a family of different, dinosaurs or whatnot. Would you, if you're working on a project like that, would that be all in the same file where you're able to copy and stuff? Would you be able to copy and paste things between the different creatures as a starting point?
Yeah, you can do both. You can start with one creature and then you can chop that up and then do variations. You can start, you generally would have one creature, one file. It's called subtools. You could make a file, a project, which has all your dinosaurs in it. But most people would, like with any other program, you'd make it so you can have one dinosaur, one file, and especially if you're going into a pipeline, if you're going into an office where there's other people, you would make one thing. What you might do though is you might have parts of that thing, so you might have a pack that's just heads or horns. Or when we build dragons, I worked on Game of Thrones interactive for the House of Dragon, and I had to make something in the region of about 200 horns, something like something ridiculously huge.
Wow.
And then we make a pack, so each of those horns is in the pack, so that's all within one project within ZBrush. So you build up, but that's like any what we call assets. In the movie or game industry, you have asset packs, and that's like a pack of all the individual parts that make up a given thing.
Gotcha. Makes sense. Yeah. People should definitely check out your review if you have not already, and I'll be linking to that in the show notes. But you mentioned things like Z-spheres and Dynamesh that we've already talked about. What are some of any other foundational ZBrushy things worth pointing out?
There's a render. There's a thing called BPR on the menu that's basically how you render it. So once you've got something and you want to have a look at it, you can render it, which adds things like lighting and shadows and stuff like that. That's worth having a little look at. Just trying to think what would be I've done 5 reviews now, so I assume you're going to put some links out with this. So I think I'm with Creative Block. I'm up to 5 reviews, and the last 2 are about, I think one is 10 tips and the other one is a speed sculpt. So if you have a look at that, there's obviously the written narrative in the Creative Block article, but there's also the speed sculpt, and that kind of shows you everything you've just described. If you have a look at that, you'd be able to you can unpick it just from the speed sculpt, really.
Yeah, to see your process, and that's how you kind of
pretty much you can get it from that. And there's 2. I do a lot of videos and a lot of we sell courses on Nomad, and we're writing one for ZBrush, but we're not there with it yet. I didn't think it was ready to do the course while all of the tools weren't there, so that's in being made now. So eventually there will be a course from me, but when it's right, really.
And you mentioned ZBrush has, I think, around 100 brushes on the iPad version and then 10 in the free. Any unique brushes that really make ZBrush shine over some of the competitors out there? Yeah,
the 100 number was completely arbitrary. I pulled that out of the air because I don't know. There's that many. People sell packs of them as well now on ArtStation and on Etsy.
Oh, interesting. In the iPad version, you can import.
You're just exactly brushes. The same. Yeah, it's the same. You just load it in exactly the same. So the brushes that I would say, and I have done a video on this in the last few weeks, is there's cloth brushes, which is a great one to learn. So basically, as you pull on the clay, it would fold it like a piece of cloth or a piece of skin even. So I've used that for dinosaurs' necks. I've used it for wings. It pulls the brushes through the air like it's a piece of cloth. That's well worth any of the cloth brushes. It's worth having a look at. So that's a definite tip.
Very cool. And then I'm just very curious about the kind of 3D nature of this type of work. Like as you're going in and forming like a tooth and like getting to see every part of that 3D shape, like is it a bit of a challenge to actually do the sculpting where you're on this, the screen that you're like zooming in and kind of rotating around. Like, what's that
No,
whole
really.
process like?
If you do that process that I've said, where you just you make basically you've got to make a few things to understand how the tools work, but most of it is knowing what you want to make. So a tooth is a shape, and if you know that that there's X amount of teeth in a mouth, and there's incisors, molars, canines, whatever. Once you know the shape, so your reference is crucial. So doing a canine tooth is really just a sphere that you pull out the top of and bend it. That's it. Because when you think about everything in primary forms, so everything has a primary shape. So a bottle of Coke is a cylinder. A head is a sphere with a cube at the bottom for the jaw. An iPad is a cube that's just elongated. You just think of everything in terms of primary shapes, then put those primary shapes together and then sculpt on them is the best way to think about this process.
Okay. And you mentioned with the Pinocchio that you actually did a 3D print of what you were modeling. What kind of, from ZBrush, is that something fairly easy to output into a 3D printer, and what kind of limitations would you need to put on your creation so the 3D printer could actually reproduce it properly?
The native, Pinocchio is the pinnacle of modeling, because it takes, we can't rationalize it down to that, because there's so many moving parts. But the essence of it is anything you make in ZBrush can be output as an OBJ or an STL, which is straight to your 3D printer. So you literally can go from ZBrush to your printer. If you can make it, you can print it. It's that. Well, basically, you have to go to a slicing app first. But the slicing app usually takes STL or OBJ format, so it's as simple as that. Anything you've made on the screen. Bearing in mind you might have to scale it, but
I was wondering about size. Like when you're in ZBrush, are you able to see how big it actually is, or is that a scaling process? Is that done afterwards?
Yeah, there's a scaling feature in there, same as any other tools. Yeah, so you just basically set it, and Nomad Sculpt's just the same. So you set it at 1, it's 1 millimeter. You set it to 10, it's 10 millimeters, and then start with a cube that's say 50 millimeters, and then you're in the right ballpark. Then the scaling is quite easy in that regard. None of it is as easy as CAD based, because you can't dimension things the same way.
So ZBrush would not be the primary tool if you're, say, trying to make an iPad stand. I was wondering, are you able to import 3D objects into ZBrush as a reference? I want to throw a 3D rendition of whatever table in there.
Yeah, absolutely. Bring in any 3D model. Most formats can come in. OBJ is the most common. FBX, OBJ, STL, they're the main kind of formats that you would see.
So you mentioned earlier the Apple Pencil being kind of an integral tool to ZBrush. Anything else to mention about that? Does it take advantage of double tap, or is it just purely that's the best way to input into this application?
Yeah, it's not. As far as I can tell, it's not coded particularly for any. Certainly not the squeeze or anything like that I know of. Again, it's so. I haven't been able to test the pencil for a few weeks now, so I haven't spent much time with the new pencil with the latest ZBrush. So. You don't really need that much more of the newer features on the pencil. The pencil's just so good as it is, just as an input, straight input on the screen with pressure. That pretty much does everything that you would want. When we use a Wacom or a stylus, we are taking into account the fact that it's more like a mouse, so we've got buttons on it that are much more right click, middle click. There's a lot more of that. Whereas with ZBrush on the iPad, you've pretty much been given the controls on screen. So your non-dominant hand is doing the work that the buttons on a Wacom stylus would do. So you don't miss them. And I think I said this in my reviews, literally after 5 minutes, you don't care. You forget. Yeah. You're just straight in, which is great, which means they've actually thought about the UX and how not to get in your way. That seems to work quite well as it is. So what they might add with the pencil, once it... So my understanding of the pencil when I did my last review was that it would only work on those latest models anyway. So I think what they would all be aiming for is let's just cater for the masses, and then once that is the de facto pencil, we can probably code in for those extra clicks and bips and
right. Yep. And they're slowly getting there. Like the iPad Mini now supports Apple Pencil Pro, so as they release new hardware, this will be the de facto model.
Yeah, you can't go back with it. You couldn't buy the older model with the newer pencil,
right?
I think I definitely got this across in my reviews. Is I definitely feel like we were seeing something that was built for the future.
For sure, yeah. And as you're working on the pencil, does it reject your finger input?
No, not that I'm aware of. It's seamless. Okay. Oh yeah, it's absolutely seamless. It's
okay. I was wondering like if you're drawing something on the screen and you accidentally also tap somewhere on, it's not going to interrupt.
Well, most of them. I mean, I've obviously got 4 years with Nomad, but with Nomad you can literally set everything. So you can say what things can do. So you can say what your pinch does, what your single tap with your finger does, what your pen does. You can restrict and add and remove whatever you want. So if any of your movements becomes a problem, you can just turn that off. And ZBrush has got a preferences setting that's similar to that. Now, I haven't spent a lot of time exploring what you can and the thing is, if something's working really well with the pen and your hand, you tend to just get on with it.
Sure.
It's not something that I've tinkered with a lot, or not, or at least it's not come up, in my explorations of it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then for those already heavily in the ZBrush world, going from desktop to iPad, that file is the same both places, I'd imagine. Is it stripping anything out as you open up the iPad version?
Literally the same. No. Literally the same file format. There might be some issues with older file formats and older versions, but that's the same with desktop anyway. So one of the frustrations with ZBrush is that an older version of ZBrush won't open newer versions of a ZBrush file, whereas things like Cinema 4D, you can open a file from 10 years ago with you can go forward and backwards. So if you still have an old version from 6-7 years ago, you can generally open all of the newer files as well, whereas you can't with ZBrush. But that's more of a ZBrush problem than it is anything to do with Apple, or it's just the way that they've developed it. But nobody I haven't heard anybody on the forums or anywhere complaining about it being a problem. It's seamless back and to between desktop and iPad.
Nice. And then features that haven't made to the iPad, like the UV, they just don't appear on the iPad, even though it's still in the file.
It's just not there. Yeah, you can see them and you can texture over them, so you just can't generate them in the same way. But and we need to be careful because things are changing. I think now, because they're on round 2 now, I think things will, every update that everything that I'm saying here could have changed by the time we get this out. They're going to go on and up, and the same with Nomad. The developer pushes a new version every week, so it's kind of a rolling update. So I don't know how.
I see.
Yeah, I don't know how Mac's on it. Things will be added with some speed now. I think now the core is working and is out there, I think we'll get things like it will just change again. It's one of those things where you have to go in and have a look at what the current state of play is.
And what are the big features that you're hoping make it to the iPad version pretty soon here?
So I need UV, really. That is one that I would need. I want them to make a real-time renderer, which they don't have on the desktop yet. To go up against Nomad Sculpt without a real-time renderer now is weak in the marketplace. They definitely need, and I think they know that. I think it's a known quantity, but they need to. Their render solution is they've got their own proprietary one, but they bought one when Maxon acquired ZBrush. They also acquired something called Redshift, which is a render engine. And what they did was they integrated that. Redshift was a standalone renderer, and you could use it in things like in Cinema 4D. Well, it's now in Cinema 4D, and it's also in ZBrush as well. So I think but that's a true renderer, like a ray tracing renderer, where it's a still that you get. What we want is real time. We want to be able to see what we're making. The world has changed significantly now, and because of things like Unreal Engine, people coming through uni are expecting to see their stuff moving as they're making it. it doesn't feel right that you make a bit, try and render a frame, make a bit, render a frame. That feels very...
So as you're sculpting, you're not seeing what it actually will look like.
No, you're not seeing any of the... So you can see paint on the surface, and you can see there's two types of rendering or shadow. So one's called matte cap, which is basically using a pre-baked set of lighting. That's the same in almost every program. So that's the same in Nomad, same in Blender on the desktop. So matte cap is one thing, but if you added a light in, nothing would happen. You wouldn't see anything because the lighting is baked to it. That's like the red clay that you see when you're sculpting. If you start ZBrush, quite often you'd see a red clay. Well, that's a baked-in lighting. You can't move the lights around on that clay. The other one is basically a shader that is able to respond to light. And what we want to be able to do is have real-time lighting. So when you're sculpting, if you move a light, you'll see the shadows on a jaw, because it's got something that's just clay looks very different than when it's painted, and a human with no skin looks very different than, with just a grey skin looks very different than when they're painted. So
sure.
That's just something that's what we would like.
I see. Yeah. And then the final output from ZBrush, there's different file formats, I'd assume.
What you can send it to.
Yeah, there's the generic ones. So it's got its own proprietary one, which is like a ZTL or Z tool, that can only be used by ZBrush. And then there's a number of standard industry formats. So OBJ, which is from the 90s, is an old Maya format, a wavefront. So when it was alias wavefront, so that's how old that file format is. That's .obj. You got FBX, and I think they might even have some of the newer ones, some of the Kronos ones that they use in things like for more of the augmented kind of file formats. But again, file formats is something that changes and evolves. So FBX, STL, and OBJ are the ones that most people will be used to using.
Gotcha. Okay. And then as far as the free version of ZBrush and iPad, the big barriers are just the limitations on the number of brushes. Is that the big one?
Yeah, that's mostly it's just limitations of tools. Yeah, there's some of the brushes is down to just like a few on the bottom bar. You don't get anything beyond that, and then one or two of the tools are capped as you get deeper into it. But yeah, it's not a blocker if you're just starting, because you wouldn't know what's missing anyway.
Sure.
you can make something and it's pretty it's pretty solid. It's when you go, it's once you've experimented to the level with that where you want to go to the next level and you want to do cloth, or so you don't get any of the there's something called dynamics built into the paid one, and that is literally a full dynamic system where you can literally sculpt a cloth and drop it in the air and it'll fall onto whatever you've sculpted, and then that, as it stops and the physics still carries on, you can then freeze it and then use that. So if you're sculpting a cape, you now just make the cloth, drop it, and it forms the cape. So that's not in the free one, obviously. So they're the higher end tools.
Are you able to simulate different wind environments in that to see how the cloth behaves?
Not so much. It's not a full dynamic system as it would be in Maya and Cinema 4D. But what you can do is you can affect the gravity and you can affect the direction of the gravity. And you can even set things on, like you could say, you can set it as if it's called liquefy, where you basically, it's if you're dropping it into a tank of liquid, so the cloth would drop. So there's lots you can play with, but it's not like a full dynamic system that you would get in a full animation package.
I see. Gotcha. And I was just thinking, like in movies, there's maybe that cape's burning. That would be something that's done in a different tool as they're, creating the film and working with that asset, right?
Yeah, but generally so the cape underneath is polygons. So what you start with, generally speaking, in most cases, is a polygon. So if it's a cape and it's flapping and it's on fire, they would build and animate the cape first of all with polygons, and then they might put some sculpting data on top of that. Obviously, a texture, sometimes a black and white texture, which means the black's removed and the white is seen. So that gives you like the ripped ends of capes and stuff like that. But then things like that cake then burning is done with simulation packages, and there's loads of different ones. The main one that the industry is using at the moment is Houdini. And that would generate. So Houdini would do a lot of that. It would do the modeling and the simulation and the fire and the smoke and the water. It's a seriously high end package with a seriously high end learning curve on it as well. But if anybody's into that and wants to look at that, if you look up Houdini, and there was other ones that have come through called Real Flow, and a lot of the programs have them built in now. But not to the level. Houdini is probably the one that most people in movies would be used to.
Okay. And then just anything else about ZBrush that you'd like to touch on before we wrap it up?
Only that it's quite, I've said it right at the beginning. It came late to this party, really. It's, it's, as much as it's got 25 years under its belt, 30 years now. It's only new on the iPad, and this is only version 1. What we're talking about on this podcast today will be radically different in a year's time. So, if this is the kind of thing that you're considering, or you think it's something you might step into, go in there with an open mind that it's going to change and evolve. And also, don't forget, this podcast is predominantly talking about ZBrush, but I'm not a salesman for Maxon or ZBrush. Find out what tool does what you want, so explore a bit, and if it doesn't suit your needs, then you might not need it. If you want to sculpt, then it's one of your two choices. Then you have to go through that little bit of a chain of, do I want to pay a subscription? Yes or no. Do I need real-time rendering? Yes or no. And then eventually you'll come. There's no hardship to download both. For 15 quid for Nomad and free for ZBrush, I think you can't really go wrong in, I know £15 might be a lot for some people, but the the majority of people who are listening to this wouldn't mind paying for that overall. And if you don't have any funds, then ZBrush gives you that free version to try. So there's no harm in you just dipping in and having a look at it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so check out Nomad Sculpt as well. Very well established tool, and that's an iPad first tool, right? There's no desktop component to that.
No, he does a web version, so that there's a web demo which makes you want it on the Mac and the PC. But he started, he launched directly 4 years ago straight onto the iPad. We were going heavy with Forger. We thought Forger was the way forward. We'd started a YouTube channel based on Forger. And then I had an argument with my business partner saying, look, I can see this is going to go badly, because if Forger gets bought out, we might miss the boat here. And I was completely right, because Nomad just dominated. It just became such a good tool. I wish ZBrush had entered the market then. I think if we'd be having a very different conversation if ZBrush had beat Nomad to the market.
Yeah, and then Nomad would have competition, and their app would be even better today as well.
Absolutely, and I'm all for that. I don't get paid by, or I don't take a paycheck from any developer. I'm completely agnostic with it. I use whatever I think makes the right thing for me. So I've got no loyal. I do have friendships, and I do have I have a reason to stay with certain tools, but it's usually because it's the right tool. I try and stay. Because I teach a lot of this, and because I like to stay independent, I like to just be able to say what is the right tool without any influence. I'm not being paid to say that anything of that I've said today. They're because I use them and I teach them, and that it's a true reflection of what I've seen in my time with them.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time. This was great chatting about this and learning more about this fascinating world of digital sculpting.
No worries at all. I hope people enjoy it. If anybody wants to get any more of the information, I'm sure my details will be in your notes. But my company is SouthernGFX, and basically you can find out most of what I've said by just following those that name really anywhere on social media.
Awesome. And where can people read your review?
So Creative Block, BLOQ, is the website where I've been writing for them. They're the digital arm of Future Publishing's tech world. So if you know ImagineFX magazine and 3D World magazine, the one that I've just said is closing down, the print version. Creative Block is where I write all of my tech reviews and stuff like that. So, just search Creative Block and then Glen Southern, so my name, and then all of my reviews, all of the iPad reviews, the pencil, the ZBrush reviews, and all that stuff I've been talking about. That'll just appear in a feed there.
Perfect. Yeah, and I'll link to a bunch of those in the notes as well. And thank you again. Appreciate it.
No worries at all. Thank you so much.
Well, that's my discussion with Glen all about ZBrush and digital sculpting. My thanks again to Glen for his time recording. My thanks to you for your time and attention tuning in. As a reminder, you can support this podcast over at patreon.com/iPadPros or by subscribing in Apple Podcasts. With that, I'll talk with everyone again real soon.